this point that they can lobby the governments. They're such a strong voice. The government doesn't feel they can do anything to actually require them to label things. So at this point, the general population is less important to the government than these transnational corporations. That's a big impact, in my opinion, when we're not being listened to by our own governments.
The major trend we're seeing with the corporations now is to say let's go below the radar screen even of the patent system and of government regulators by really trying to manipulate the ownership of the DNA. And if you can actually atomically modify a plant instead of genetically modify a plant, then you have a level of control there that you'd never have any other way. And we're seeing the movement directly toward that now with a huge investment of money in that field in the last just a couple of years.
What I've got here in just one of these bags is millions upon millions of seed, and you'd be surprised at how many fields of arugula you could plant out of a bag this small. While it's so small and you can pick this up and put it away somewhere, you have the potential for vast quantities of food. Each single one of these little tiny seeds is, in fact, a plant, but just in a different stage of its life. Once the seed is exposed to the right environment around it with oxygen, moisture, and nutrients in the soil, it can sense that and it starts to sprout a little taproot that seeks nutrients. It starts to put out its first leaves. It starts to photosynthesize. And within a matter of weeks, you have an edible plant that can nourish your body.
Seeds can grow plants, nourish our bodies. But for others, seeds can be a source of profit and control.
We're risking a lot here. We're losing control of the food supply. We're increasingly transferring from a system designed to produce food to one that's designed to produce profits. We're in the fastest food supply drawdown in probably a century right now. In 7 out of 8 years, the world has consumed more food than it produced. And then we've got climate change bearing down on us. It's almost like a perfect storm.
Climate change is here. We can no longer ignore it. Climate change makes all other problems worse.
We are seeing this incredible collapse of our flexibility in the food system. With climate change, we're really putting humanity at high risk here. We've only got a couple of decades to try to figure out what to do about this and to move back to a system or move forward to a more creative system in which farmers are really full players and directors of the research initiatives we need to have to get ourselves through climate change. They're the ones that got the expertise. If we don't...
In the prairies, we have tended to plant just a few varieties of wheat, for example, that were popular at any given snapshot in time. And we carry that on, but we understand that that's not particularly when confronted with climate change and a bunch of other problems, that's not a wise strategy.
In the 1950s, wheat was the main crop in the Canadian prairies. Millions upon millions of acres, and most of it for export. The prairies were planted with very few varieties. With only a few varieties of wheat, a plant disease could spread quickly through the whole crop. And it did. The disease was stem rust of wheat. Devastation was huge.
In about 1950, a new race of stem rust came along, which unfortunately was virulent on almost every wheat variety in North America. And of course, this caused a great panic because there was just nothing that could be grown. And unfortunately, the race 15B spread very quickly.
These are plants that have been ruined by the disease known as stem rust of wheat.
The economic loss was huge. Hundreds of millions of dollars in that one epidemic.
The rust covered everything. And when the work was done, you were lucky if the quality was good enough for chicken feed. Lots of people didn't even bother. Figured they might just as well plow it under and try again next year.
When I first started to look for resistance, we had some lines, and a number of them came, in fact, from Ethiopia. They were the durum wheat, which is a different species than the ordinary bread wheat. Wheat has been grown for many years there, and I guess so over the years the Ethiopian varieties have developed resistance to rust, and that's why we need to keep them in case in the future there's some new problem comes along that we don't anticipate, and we can go back to these old varieties and find a source of resistance to whatever the problem is.
This frozen mountain, north of the Arctic Circle in Norway, will become the home of what's being called the Doomsday Vault.
We want to preserve all these seeds for the possible use of future generations, and what God created we should not be allowed to destroy.
The Svalbard Global Seed Vault will be the ultimate safety net for the seeds of the world's food crops in case of a global catastrophe, such as severe climate change.
This will be the last line of defense against extinction for all of the crop diversity that we have in the world today. So it's extremely important for future generations, for ourselves as well.
Airlock doors lead to 2 chambers carved out of the rock deep in the permafrost.
It's one of the safest places you can ever think of.
The biodiversity of this Earth will be stored here at minus 18 degrees Celsius.
This is going to be a facility that makes the scientists smile because it's just what we need and want.
Canada's national gene banks, like others around the world, will be putting duplicates of their seed collections into the Doomsday Vault, seeds that could be the key to our future food security. But all gene banks are designed for safe storage, a backup, not evolution. But plants are dynamic, constantly changing and evolving to cope with new pressures, new diseases.
And what the farmers are doing is far more important, because a gene bank puts seed on ice. And there's no guarantee if it's brought out of the gene bank 30 years later that it's going to be able to give us any help with the new conditions that they'll face in the field with new pests and new diseases because of climate change. The farmer's variety, because it's changing every growing season, adjusting to new conditions every growing season, will always be more useful than anything you'll ever find in a gene bank.
Ethiopia. The crops that feed people here are the ones that have adapted and survived centuries of pests, diseases, droughts, and floods. They aren't dependent on oil-based chemicals and fertilizers or mechanization. They can grow in harsh conditions on marginal land we'd call too poor to farm. These seeds are resilient and diverse, survivors, seeds that aren't connected to the price of oil. It's a different system here and a different story. Our crops are dependent on oil, and our system is vulnerable to changing conditions.
Ecosystems use diversity to maintain resilience. If there's a diverse mix of plants, if something changes suddenly, different plants come to the fore and the system kind of restores stability. But we're very quickly removing the diversity from the global crop mix, and we're steadily reducing the number of plants and plant varieties upon which we base our food supply. At any time, that would probably be a bad idea. But if we're also facing probably the most rapid and severe change in our climatic patterns in human history, reducing biodiversity and thus reducing the resilience and adaptability of our food system is absolute folly at this point.
No one knows what climate change will bring to our food supply, but we do know what a food catastrophe can look like. Over 20 years ago, there was a severe drought, civil war, and famine in Ethiopia. Crops failed and failed again the next year. Some crop varieties were close to extinction. Only the small samples in the National Gene Bank were left. There were enough seeds to re-establish the crops, but Ethiopian scientists knew that something more than a gene bank was needed for a secure food supply. What was needed were ways for farmers to save enough seeds for next year's crop, ways to improve those crops, and ways to preserve biodiversity. Ways to combine farmers' traditional knowledge with the work of scientists. So, the community seed banks were started with support from a Canadian development organization, USC Canada. These are living